good evening, everybody. It's time for us to get started, and we are going to turn to 1 Samuel chapter 28 tonight. 1 Samuel 28. And we are progressing through the narrative of the United Kingdom. Of course, Saul is king as we're studying at this period, and really, he is in the final stages of his decline while David is on the ascent, and we'll see more of his ascent as we come into the book of 2 Samuel, the early chapters there. And let's just, reviewing just briefly, where is David as we close chapter 27?
He was down with the
Philistines, that's right. The city he's in is, you remember the name of it? Ziklag, that's right. So he's in Ziklag, he's with the Philistines, and basically he's kind of trying to, he's not attacking the people of Judah, but he's trying to ally himself basically, at least with one king of the Philistines. It looks like to me, Israel was like this during the days of the judges, where it wasn't like they were united under one person. But there were times where they kind of banded together. I think the Philistines were kind of like that at this point, where you've got several different, maybe we'd think of them as like city-states. Ziklag was one, Ashkelon, Gaza. You've got these other Philistine cities. And so Achish is one of those kings who's over this. So he's with the Philistines, but he's not really like all the Philistines. I don't even think all the Philistines know that he's among them. It's just Achish that he's made this deal with. So he's there, and Saul is basically, we kind of have a pause in the action between Saul and David at the end of 26. Basically, Saul's just going to kind of go on his own way, and really he's going to have to focus, I think, more on the Philistines as we move forward into chapter 28.
kind of slow down on David when he found out that he was in with the Philistines area, that he didn't want to tackle that
yeah.
And he kind of done other things.
Yeah. It does. Yeah, that's right. Where are we? The beginning of 27, verse 4, when it's told Saul that he had fled to Gath, he no longer sought him. So yeah, that you've got that. That's a release of that pressure valve. I think we talked about the other night, where if he's in the Philistine territory, there's not a lot that Saul can do anyway without stirring up other issues. All right. Anything else through chapter 27 to get us ready as we go into chapter 28? All right, Alan, why don't you start us off?
Now it happened in those days that the Philistines gathered their armies together for war to fight with Israel. And Achish said to David, "You shall surely know that you will go out with me to battle, you and your men." So David said to Achish, "You surely know what your servant can do." And Achish said to David, "Therefore I will make you my chief guardians forever." And so why does Achish have so much confidence in David?
Because of all the property and stuff that he's brought.
All the plunder that he's bringing in, he's like. And we'll learn later that David's been with him for over a year, and maybe even years, that David has been here in the Philistine territory. And this whole time, David's coming in with his men, and he's coming in with his spoil, and Achish thinks that's coming from Israel. That's coming from Israel's allies. But who's it really coming from?
It's coming from the allies.
It's coming from the allies of the Philistines. And so David has kept up this front for a while here. And so that's why Achish feels about David the way he does, and he should. I mean, all he sees is what's coming in, and David and his men are very capable in doing what he needs them to do, going to battle against Israel. And so he's got
the biggest thing, the reason it looks so good to Achish, is when David goes in there and cleans house, he kills all the men, women, and children. So there's nobody that can actually say that David and his men come in there and took everything.
Right. And so he has no reason to doubt David here. And so that's why he backs him and has all this confidence in him. But we'll continue on here, and we'll go through verse 7.
Just one thing.
Sorry.
So we're really not going to resolve this issue until chapter 29. So we'll go through all of chapter 28, and we just kind of put a pin in this. because he's got a dilemma, because he's going to go fight against Israel and he doesn't want to fight against Israel, but he can't fight against Achish. And so how is that going to be resolved? But I think David is intentionally vague with Achish, right? Like, you'll see what your servant can do. It's positive, but it is vague. But Achish is fully bought into him. He has no doubt that David's on his side. But yeah, sorry.
That's a good point. And so now, like Larson said, we're going to put a pin in that and see what's going on back in Israel. So in verse 3, it says, Now Samuel had died, and all Israel had lamented for him, and buried him in Ramah in his own city. And Saul had put the mediums and the spirits out of the land. Then the Philistines gathered together, and they came and encamped at Shunem. And Saul gathered all Israel together, and they encamped at Gilboa. Then Saul saw the army of the Philistines, and he was afraid, and his heart trembled greatly. And when Saul inquired of the Lord did not answer him, either by dreams or the Urim or by prophets. And then Saul said to his servants, Find me a woman who is a medium, that I may go to her and inquire of her. And his servants said, In fact, there is a woman who is a medium at Endor. And so Saul's kind of run out of options here, or what he thinks his options are. And so he turns to something that he knows is not right. And it mentions that Samuel's not there, so he can't go to Samuel and find out what he needs to do. And then what's happened to the high priest at this time? He's dead. Saul has the high priest is killed, and then his son is defected and went with David. So, and I don't know if there's multiple Urim and Thummim, but I was under the impression there was only one. And if there is only one, it's with David. It's not with Saul. So when the high priest's son fled, I can't think of his name right now, but when he fled, he took all that with him.
Abiathar.
Okay. Thank you. And but we know that Saul knows that this is not right. And how do we know that? Based off the text we just read. He had them all put out of the land. And when Saul didn't kill Agag, Samuel mentioned to him then, he said, For rebellion is as the sin of witchcraft, is what he told Saul back when Saul didn't kill Agag there. And so Saul almost made it his mission. Well, if that's terrible and that's rebellion, he said, I'm going to go after that. So he goes after that, after idols. It was kind of like his spearhead thing that he was going to do good for the Lord. Now, he didn't want to do all that the Lord commanded him and all that the Lord expected of him, but this was kind of like his little niche that I guess made him feel good about himself. I'm going to put out all the idols, and I'm going to put out the witches of the land, and there's not going to be any of that here. And so I think that's kind of his spearhead, maybe the only thing that he might to make himself feel good at this time, and maybe throughout his reign, was that he did that for the Lord.
Yeah, there are a couple of times in Scripture, and I think this is maybe the key one, where there comes a time where a person wants to hear desperately from God, and they can't, and they don't. And the issue here is not that God's not speaking. We'll see more of that later. But Saul had not listened yet. So, I mean, I think really the question is what else did God have to say to him? Right? Like, I think it's not just a matter of, it's not like God being mad, like, well, if you're not going to listen, I'm not going to talk. But basically, God had given Saul all the information he needed to know what to do to go forward. And if he's not going to do that, then there's really no need to have a further conversation. It's not like there's an update here. So chapter 13 and verse 13 is when Saul refuses, when he goes ahead and offers the sacrifice before Samuel gets there. And Samuel says, you didn't wait for the instruction of the Lord. Chapter 15 and verse 19, you didn't obey the commandment of God. And so Saul has demonstrated himself to be somebody who really is not as concerned about the commandment of God as he ought to be, which is like, well, now you're in a desperate situation, and what you really want to do is you want to hear from God. And I think that the lesson would be the same. What Saul should do is he should go back to the last thing he heard from God, which is the kingdom's going to be torn away from you. It's going to be given to another one that's better than you. But see, Saul can't let that go. I don't think he's even in a position to accept that. Well, I'll tell you of a time that reminds me of in the New Testament. It's not exactly the same, but it's similar. Do you remember, so John the Baptist was talking to Herod, and what was the issue that he talks to Herod about? Having his brother's wife, right? It was a marriage issue that he talks to him about. Well, Herod didn't listen in that. In fact, he rebels against God's word spoken through Herod. When Jesus is on trial, Herod is very excited. He could not wait to hear Jesus. He'd been waiting. When Jesus stands before Herod, do you remember what Jesus says to him? Exactly. Not one word. He did not answer him a word. Now, Herod gets frustrated with that and sends him back to Pilate. It's like, what's going on here? But I think basically the lesson there is that Jesus didn't have anything else to say to Herod if he wasn't ready to hear what God had already revealed to him. And maybe there's a lesson in that for us. I think sometimes what we want is we want to hear something new or something different or something better or something that, maybe we'll go back and look at it one more time, see if I can get some more information, when all along we know the thing that we're disobedient in. And until we obey in that, it's going to be really hard to move forward. Which reminds me of James chapter 1, where he says, removing all wickedness and removing all overflow of wickedness. Receive with meekness the engrafted word which is able to save your souls. I think there is a sense in which we have to clear ground to be able to receive more of God's word. And I think maybe in some ways that's what's going on with Saul here. Saul, his heart was hardened by jealousy and by arrogance and by bitterness and all of those things. And God wasn't speaking to him because it wasn't going to do any good anyway. Saul wasn't listening to the things that had been revealed. So he's desperate for a word from God. And as Alan Day mentioned, the fact that he goes and he searches for a witch, a medium, a necromancer to speak, I think shows us the depths to which he had gone, like the depths to which he had fallen. From a place where Saul at one point had known this is not something for the people of God, to now he is pursuing this. And we're going to see more about that in just a second. But wow, how the mighty have fallen, if we can say. He's brought so low. And I think that maybe at least part of this is intended to demonstrate to us that this is not a story of somehow David taking the throne in some kind of conniving, unfair way. Saul brings this on himself. He just absolutely is a tool for his own destruction in so many ways. Well, God brought it on him in one way, but he brought it on him because of his own choices to turn away and rebel. So I think that takes us through verse 7. Anybody questions or comments? Yes, ma'am.
Verse 5, that just really shows the contrast between him and his son Jonathan.
Yeah.
If there was one person who said, "May the Lord be with her," in our hands, his father just said that.
Yeah, that's a great point. And we've seen that for a long time now, right? All the way since 17. Chapter 17 with Goliath, right? Like Saul's as scared as everybody else is. And so you would think over time there would have been a cultivation of faith, but you just don't have that. I think that's a great point. And I think, Jonathan, that does serve as a great parallel to see the differences between him and his father.
And it's hard to have that confidence when you know the Lord's not with you.
Oh, yeah, that's right. Good point. Anything else through verse 7? Okay, you can take us to the next part too,
Okay.
if you want.
8.
Yep.
So Saul disguised himself and put on other clothes and went, and 2 men with him, and they came to the woman by night. And he said, "Please conduct a seance for me, and bring up for me the one that I should name to you." Then the woman said to him, "Look, you know what Saul has done, how he has cut off the mediums and the spirits from the land. Spiritist from the land. Why then do you lay a snare for my life to cause me to die?" And Saul swore to her by the Lord, saying, "As the Lord lives, no punishment shall come upon you for this thing." Then the woman said, "Whom shall I bring up for you?" And he said, "Bring up Samuel for me." When the woman saw Samuel, she cried out with a loud voice. And the woman spoke to Saul, saying, "Why have you deceived me? For you are Saul." And the king said to her, "Do not be afraid. What did you see?" And the woman said to Saul, "I saw a spirit ascending out of the earth." And he said to her, What is his form?" And she said, "An old man coming up and he is covered with a mantle. And Saul perceived that it was Samuel, and he stooped with his face to the ground and bowed down. Then Samuel said to Saul, Why have you disturbed me by bringing me up? And Saul answered, I am deeply distressed, for the Philistines make war against me, and God has departed from me, and does not answer me any more, either by the prophets or by dreams. Therefore I have called you, that you may reveal to me what should I do. Then Samuel said, So why do you ask me, seeing the Lord has departed from you, and has become your enemy? And the Lord has done for himself, and the Lord has done for himself, as he spoke by me. For the Lord has torn the kingdom out of your hand, and given it to your neighbor David, because you did not obey the voice of the Lord, nor executed his fierce wrath upon Amalek. Therefore the Lord has done this thing to you this day. Moreover, the Lord will also deliver Israel with you into the hand of the Philistines, and tomorrow you and your sons will be with me. The Lord will also deliver the army of Israel into the hand of the Philistines. And so, kind of backing up where we started, why does Saul disguise himself when he goes to the meeting?
Because he didn't want the rich to know that he was king.
Right. So he wants to try to access Samuel, and he knows if he goes dressed like a king, she's not going to do it because Saul's been putting him out of the land or putting him to death. And so he disguises himself here. I think it's interesting to note the medium's response when she sees Samuel. It says she cries out with a loud voice. And it almost seems to me that this is not her normal seance that she does. This is different than what normally occurs when she tries to do whatever this is. And so she's frightened or taken back by it. And the first thing she says is, yeah, you're Saul. Why have you deceived me? And Saul is like, it is me, but don't worry. You're going to be fine. But what did you see? I've got to know. And so she goes on to tell him, or it says that Samuel tells him that the Lord has departed from him, which he knows this. This is not new information, as Larson mentioned. And that the Lord has torn the kingdom away from him and given it to David. Now, this is the first time that he's directly told that David is going to receive the kingdom. He's kind of put two and two together on his own. But this is the first time he's directly been told David is the one who's getting the kingdom. And he also mentions that Saul and his sons will die tomorrow, and that Israel is going to be defeated in this battle. And so not only is Saul getting punished for his sin, but there's a ton of people that are getting punished for this. And Jonathan being one of those. And as far as we know, Jonathan is right in God's sight. But he's still going to suffer because of Saul's sin here. And I say that in our view. And, maybe from God's view, I say maybe, there's a good possibility from God's view that Jonathan's being spared a lot of hardship and maybe trouble that he would have to go through. But from our worldly standpoint, Jonathan's being punished because of Saul's unfaithfulness here. And not only Jonathan, but there's who knows how many men with him that's going to be punished for the same thing. And so that should let us know something, that our sin doesn't always just affect us. It affects the people around us, and it can be severe in that. So let's see. Yeah, do you have anything you want to add?
Yeah, just a few notes along through there. So look at verse 10. Saul swore to her by the Lord, or by Yahweh, as Yahweh lives, no punishment shall come upon you for this thing. So that just, the idea that Saul would swear by God's name about this is, just makes you sick, So this is not right in God's sight, what she's doing. Him going to her is a forbidden thing. She is afraid that she's going to be punished, rightfully so, and he goes, I swear by God's name, by Yahweh, that you will not suffer for this. So he's invoking God to give her immunity from something that God says she should be put to death for. And, by the way, Saul should be put to death for because he's doing this that is not right too. And it's just, here's an example of, you think about taking God's name in vain. I think Saul here is taking God's name in vain in one sense, in the way that he is still using God-following type language, right? Swearing by God's name to justify wicked, ungodly activities. And sometimes we can do that. We can use spiritual, religious-sounding language and maybe just use that to cover up activities we know that are wrong. I think when Samuel comes up out of the flame or whatever, I think she's surprised by it. I think she's like, oh, it worked. I'm not sure it had worked before. I think it kind of caught her off guard. And it would be like, what would happen if I called up somebody and they came out of the flame? I would be like, whoa, man, that happened. I can't believe that, which basically anytime I repair anything and it comes on, I'm like, oh, it worked, I'm super surprised. So, what word does yours say in verse 13? And the woman said to Saul, I see a spirit. So the English Standard says, I see a God. The New American Standard says, I see a divine coming up out of the earth. I was looking at another translation. Basically, I think I know the word there is Elohim, which is the same word that's translated God in other places, but it doesn't always mean the God, right? So Elohim is more like a category of being. So we might use the phrase spiritual beings. I think that's probably a pretty good word, a spirit. That's probably really what the word means. But then when you talk about God, He's the Spirit, right? He's the divine, and so maybe it's less. It's like a more specific version. One way I've heard it described is like, so like cats. This is like a category term, but then you see a lion out on the savannah, and you say that's the cat, right? So you got Elohim is being used here, but it's just being used in its generic form and not in the form that's referring to God. She's not saying that she sees, the divine creator of heaven and earth coming up out of the flame, but just a spirit being. You maybe didn't have a question about that, but if you look at the English Standard, it is a little strange there. And then, when you hear Saul's words in verse 15, so basically Samuel said, why are you bothering me? And the Philistines are against me. God has turned away from me and answers me no more, either by prophets or dreams. Isn't that as desperate and as sad a situation as you can imagine? So the very reason that Saul had been called to be king was to handle situations like the Philistines. Now they're at war with him, and God, who was supposed to be his strength, won't answer. When I look here, I recall 1 Samuel chapter 12, which was Samuel's farewell address. He says, but if you will not obey, God will sweep you away, both you and your king. And Saul's finding himself on the bad side of that. The people, I think, believed that by having a king, somehow they were going to be preserved from the oppression that came by these nations around them that came as a result of their disobedience. And all it did was just add the king to the pile of people who are being oppressed with them when they disobey him. So the having a king was no short circuit for the process of being obedient to God. And then, notice in verse 18, because you didn't obey the voice of the Lord and didn't carry out his fierce wrath against Amalek. We remember that from chapter 15. Therefore, the Lord has done this thing to you this day. I think the idea there is you weren't listening, so God stopped talking. God's will has not changed, and so there's not a need for an update. It's not as if God has come to Saul and say, hey, Saul, just so you know, kingdom's still being ripped away from you, right? Still being given. He didn't have to give him, he didn't have to keep speaking to him. His will in the fundamental things that related to Saul hadn't changed. And so basically then you come to tomorrow you and your son shall be with me. That was ominous because Samuel is dead. And that's not the news that Saul was looking for. I also think that when we see the downfall of Saul, it will not be David's fault. Based on Samuel's words and from the grave and from the description here, it's Saul and the Philistines working together to bring Saul's downfall. Now, Saul doesn't mean to be. The Philistines do. But David won't be the cause of his downfall. It will be the Philistines will be kind of the direct cause there. Okay, that was just maybe too many notes on all that, but some interesting things, I think. Anything else you got on all that? Anybody through verse 19? Questions or comments? All right, let's read the last few verses of this chapter. Then Saul fell at once at length on the ground. Then Saul fell at once, full length on the ground, filled with fear because of the words of Samuel. And there was no strength in him, for he had eaten nothing all day and all night. And the woman came to Saul, and when she saw that he was terrified, she said to him, Behold, your servant has obeyed you. I have taken my life in my hand, and have listened to what you have said to me. Now, therefore, you also obey your servant. Let me set a morsel of bread before you and eat, that you may have strength when you go on your way. He refused and said, I will not eat. But his servants, together with the woman, urged him, and he listened to their words. So he arose from the earth and sat on the bed. Now the woman had a fattened calf in the house, and she quickly killed it, and she took flour and kneaded it, and baked unleavened bread of it. And she put it before Saul and his servants, and they ate, and they rose and went away that night. So I think kind of the picture here is of Saul kind of having a last meal. It will be, notice he says, tomorrow, verse 19, you and your sons will be with me. This will be it. Now, maybe he eats something between then and now, but I think that's kind of this picture is like, this is it. He's going out, and kind of a final farewell. So we're going to kind of put a pin in Saul and his sons for a moment there. We'll come back to them. Really, it will actually be kind of the middle of 30, right, before we come back to them. Will it even be that quickly? Is maybe the beginning of 31. So, 29 we're going to look at in just a second, and then 30 will be kind of the consequences of 29 for David, and then it really won't be till 31 that we come back to Saul. And you kind of have this back and forth, and we could work out a timeline of all this, and maybe we'll talk about that in a few minutes. But you have anything through 28? Any other comments through chapter 28? Okay. You want to take us through some of 29?
Yes. Then the Philistines gathered together all their armies at Aphek, and the Israelites encamped by a fountain which is in Jezreel. And the lords of the Philistines passed in review by hundreds and by thousands, but David and his men passed in review at the rear with Achish. Then the princes of the Philistines said, What are these Hebrews doing here? And Achish said to the princes of the Philistines, Is this not David, the servant of Saul, king of Israel, who has been with me these days or these years? And to this day I have found no fault in him, since he defected to me. But the princes of the Philistines were angry with him. So the princes of the Philistines said to him, Make this fellow return, that he may go back to the place which you have appointed for him. And do not let him go down with us to battle, lest the battle become our adversary. For what could he reconcile himself to his master, if not with the heads of these men? Is this not David, in whom they sang to one another in dances, saying, Saul has slain his thousands, and David his 10,000s? And so here, we've got a problem, or it seems to be a problem. So Achish is the only one that David has really fooled, that he's on the Philistine side. The rest of them understand this man has killed tens of thousands of our people. And who's to say that he's not taking this opportunity to reconcile with Saul? And we go out to battle, and he delivers all of our heads to Saul. Because David had that reputation. He could win, him and his men could take out all of them if the Lord chose to do so. And they don't give the Lord credit here in this passage. But we all know that's capable of David and his men here. And so they say, send him back. We don't want him here. Send him back where you've got him kept, because we don't trust him. And rightfully so. I mean, David, he has a history of being a mighty man of war, and you're fighting his people in this battle. And so there's no real reason for David not to defect. There's nothing that they can promise David that would hold him back here. And the rest of them see it besides Achish. And if Achish knew the truth, he would know, I don't want David out there either.
And two, this is a way God is actually, without David saying, not going to fight him. He's using the Philistines to say, "No, we don't want him to go," and it's actually giving David away without saying, "I ain't fighting nothing."
Right.
Yeah, I think that's right. I think this is probably a providential discussion that they're having, even though I don't think it's specified that that's what's happening. But I think we can kind of read behind that, and I think that's right. How far did you read through?
Through 5.
Okay. I don't. It is interesting. I wonder at the end of 4, how could this fellow reconcile himself to his Lord? Would it not be with the heads of the men here? I wonder if they're thinking about Goliath, because Goliath's head he takes with him when he goes to Saul in 1 Samuel 17. I think it's verse 57. When Abner takes David to go meet Saul, he brings Goliath's head with him. And so it's like that would be an echo. Like, you do remember that this guy has presented Philistine heads to Saul before. Like, it wouldn't be the first time. Anyway, okay. Do you have anything else through 5? Anybody? All right. So,
What you just said,
yeah.
probably Goliath was probably one of the biggest warriors at the time that they all knew and feared Goliath.
Yeah.
Without fear.
Right. Yeah. Right. Okay. Look at verse 6. Then Achish called David and said, "As the Lord lives, you have been honest, and to me," which he hadn't been, but that's beside the point. "And to me it seems right that you should march out and end with me in the campaign, for I have found nothing wrong in you from the day of your coming to me this day. Nevertheless, the lords do not approve of you. So go back now and go peaceably, that you may not displease the lords of the Philistines." And David said to Achish, "But what have I done? What have you found in your servant from the day I entered your service until now, that I may not go and fight against the enemies of my lord the king?" And Achish answered and said, "I know that you are as blameless in my sight as an angel of God. Nevertheless, the commanders of the Philistines have said, 'He shall not go up with us to the battle.' Now then rise early in the morning with the servants of your Lord who came with you, and start early in the morning and depart as soon as you have light." So David set out with his men early in the morning to return to the land of the Philistines, but the Philistines went up to Jezreel. All right, so Achish comes and delivers the news to David. In verse 8, David's question there, "What have I done?" There's a couple of possibilities at what's going on there. Maybe David is disappointed. Maybe he wants to go and engage with Saul. I don't think that's the case. I think probably he is looking for a way out of this. It probably is to some extent gauging Achish's suspicions of him, right? And what I mean by that is, now you're not on board with this decision, are you, Achish? Because if Achish is, then David's in a little bit of a tight spot and will need to get out. But Achish, I think, is clear in his response that, look, this is not a me thing. This is them. You just go back and go peaceably. Let's not make them upset. And so I think David is able to get a good read on this situation. And so ultimately David will not be involved in the fight against Saul. I don't know that David knew that the fight that was happening then was the one that was going to be Saul's ultimate downfall, but he's not involved in it anyway. He will be back in Ziklag and actually pursuing the Amalekites when all of that happens. I will say this. So I think the timeline that's kind of happening here is you have the Philistines that are gathering at Aphek, and the Israelites are gathering at Gilboa, and David and his men. So, like, let's say this is day 1. David and his men are excluded, and they're going to leave on the next day, early the next morning. And I actually think that it's like day 4 that the Philistines are going to go to Shunem, and Saul's going to go see the medium. So I think we kind of got overlapping stories here, right? The Philistines and all that's happening, and it's kind of after David and his men are already going back to Ziklag that Saul goes and sees the medium. And here's why I say that, because it won't be till the next day after seeing the medium that Saul will engage with the Philistines. And they haven't fought with them yet, right? But they're making the preparations for that. So on the next day after David goes back, then they will fight, and that's when in chapter 30 David will make it back to Ziklag. And we may talk about some of that in just a second. But basically I think that gets us till to day 4 or so. Yeah, so that gets us basically through chapter 29. Any comments on all that?
You mentioned that this could have been providence.
Mm-hmm.
God. Now we can understand more. In the psalm that we read earlier, David said, "The Lord was with me."
Yeah. Yeah. That's a great point. The ways in which David recognizes God's providence and care for him in ways that you might not see unless you're looking for it. And I think there's some of that in chapter 30, actually. So in 1 Samuel 18 and verse 12, it says, this is right after, so 17 is David and Goliath, Saul's turning against David. This is verse 12. Saul was afraid of David, for the Lord was with him, but had departed from Saul. Dropping down to verse 28, when Saul knew that the Lord was with David and that Michal, Saul's daughter, loved him. So Saul's recognizing, David recognizes, God's with me. You see that in the Psalms for sure, and that's such a powerful truth that God is, His hand is with David, and David will recognize that. We'll see some of that in chapter 30. We'll have a few minutes tonight, but especially on Sunday night, Lord willing. Anything else through chapter 29?
Yeah, and that's a good point that he brought out, that God was with him, because David put himself in a no-win situation. I don't know what David would have done had he went to this battle.
Right.
But we already know it's prophesied that the Israelites are going to be defeated,
Mm-hmm.
and that Saul's going to die in that. And so God takes a no-win situation and He just removes David from it and sends him back home through the Philistines, and uses their wisdom in the matter, and says, David doesn't need to be here. Mm-hmm. And that was, I believe, God's will as well. Yeah. David, you don't need to be here. You need to go back to Ziklag.
Yeah. And let me make mention of one other story, and I don't mean to make so many connections back to the book, but like their concerns about David are really legitimate, because that idea of they'll turn around on us, like we'll march into battle and just turn around and fight, had happened already in the book of 1 Samuel. In chapter 14, they went up with Saul and Jonathan, and this is verse 21. Now the Hebrews who were with the Philistines previously, and I think what's happened is, it's a pretty decentralized situation. There's not, even though Saul is king, not everybody's like listening to and following him. And some of the Hebrews that would be kind of down in the southern part were closer to the Philistines, who went up with them all around the camp. Even they also turned to be with the Israelites who were with Saul and Jonathan. So they're all marching together to go fight the Israelites, and the Hebrews just turned and start fighting them. So the Philistines were... It was not as if this had never happened before, that a group of double agents had been in their midst. Yeah. Okay. And Tom today, we're at leadership camp this week, and Tom Holly's there teaching, and he was talking about, he's teaching on Luke 1 and 2, and mentioned how many times people in Luke 1 and 2 note the blessings of God, or God being with them. And, a lot of times when there's something coming up, people will say, good luck, right? And he's like, I hope I've got better than good luck on my side. And the phrase that Zechariah uses, or that people in the Bible use, is the hand of the Lord was with them, or the hand of the Lord was upon them. And he made a point that I thought was super helpful, because when we say good luck, what we mean is everything turn out just like you like it, right? But when you say the hand of God was on him, then if things turn out good or bad from our perspective, we can say the will of the Lord be done. And it's not up to chance, it's not up to a roll of a dice, it's not up to a lucky draw. It is God's purposes accomplished through us. And so maybe if we could start the habit of saying, the hand of the Lord be with you, or the hand of the Lord be on you, instead of good luck. I'm not saying there's never a place for good luck, if you're going to Tunica. I'm just kidding, don't go to Tunica. But no, what we want is God's hand on us and with us. And that's the defining characteristic of the life of a Christian, right? People in the world can wish each other good luck or good fortune or whatever. That's not what we're concerned about. Okay, let's just briefly look at chapter 30, if that's okay. We'll just kind of dip our toe in. So chapter 30, verse 1. Now when David and his men came to Ziklag on the third day, the Amalekites had made a raid against the Negeb and against Ziklag. They had overcome Ziklag and burned it with fire and taken captive the women and all who were in it, both small and great. They killed no one, but carried them off and went their way. And when David and his men came to the city, they found it burned with fire, and their wives and sons and daughters taken captive. Then David and the people who were with him raised their voices and wept until they had no more strength to weep. David's two wives had also been taken captive, Ahinoam of Jezreel and Abigail, the widow of Nabal of Carmel. And David was greatly distressed, for the people spoke of stoning him, because all the people were bitter in soul, each for his sons and daughters. But David strengthened himself in the Lord his God. Okay, so terrible situation. They've gone to meet up with the Philistines to rally the army. And here they come back, and what's happened? Yes, their whole town has been raided and it has been burned, and so David is. So all of the people are terribly upset, as you would imagine they would be, as you would understand. And David is in distress because what are the people saying about him? They're getting ready to stone him. That's right. Now, I don't know what the situation here is. I'm wondering if they think David did not take proper precautions in taking care of Ziklag. Maybe he says, we shouldn't have gone up there anyway, right? Wasn't our fight. Some decision that David had made, or he's the guy in charge, right? He's going to take the fall for this, even if this is not a decision that he really had an option in. He's the man who the weight is falling on. And the text tells us that David was greatly distressed. Now, that phrase, it should sound familiar to you, because when Samuel comes to Saul in 28, when he's brought up from the flame, and Samuel says, why have you brought me up? Saul says, I am greatly distressed. Now I want you to notice something here. When Saul is greatly distressed and when David is greatly distressed. When Saul's greatly distressed, he goes and finds the witch of Endor to conduct a seance for him to bring back dead Samuel to ask for information he already should have known in order to get out of a situation that he created himself. Right? When David is greatly distressed, the end of verse 6, David strengthened himself in the Lord his God. Wow. That is pretty powerful. That David recognizes in tragic circumstances that the answer is not disobedience. The answer is not to go further off the rails. Not that David is necessarily engaged in open disobedience right now. But he strengthens himself in the Lord his God, which I think goes to what Mr. Toohey said just a moment ago. The answer is to recognize God's provision. We're going to see in the following verses that what David will do is he will seek the Lord's guidance. And the difference between David and Saul is that the Lord is giving instruction to David because David has demonstrated that he will listen when God gives guidance and instruction. And so we'll see that in a bit. Anything you'd like to say through verse 6?
Well, I mean, just a contrast between the two.
Mm-hmm.
We say in our day and time, if you only pray when you're in trouble, you're in trouble.
Yeah.
And so don't only seek the Lord when it just benefits you. Seek Him, if you're not in trouble. Try to build that relationship with Him. And then when not if, but when something arises, you can bring that to Him.
Yeah.
And it's a different situation there, as if you live life like there is no God, and then, something comes up. Well, there's a God. Let me go to Him and see if He can fix this for me right quick. And then if you can get past that, then all right, there's no God anymore.
I was just thinking, because I've seen people go through stuff who are not depending on the Lord and they're not living like they should. Something will happen and I think I'm going to pass the pot. This will draw them to God. And I'm not saying it could, but how many times it's a temporary thing? It's just a quick, and then as soon as it's over, they go right back to their God.
Yeah.
So you're right. It has to be a long-standing relationship, really.
Yeah, and I was reading commentary, and I didn't write it down, but one commentator made the point that David's trust or confidence or reliance wasn't on the things he had, right? So the livestock, not his anymore, right? It belongs to Amalekites. The precious metals, not his anymore. The wives, at least at this moment, not his anymore. But God, his God still. And he could lean on him in this great distress. So we're going to look a little bit next time at the providence of God. Lord willing, next time we'll cover 30 and 31 at least. And also, 1 Chronicles 12 is a parallel account. I don't know that we will always be able to look at the parallel account in Chronicles, but we'll probably have time to at least notice a thing or two from there Sunday night. So you might just look over that text. I don't think it's very long in 1 Chronicles 12. Okay? Thank you very much for your participation tonight.
Thanks for watching. If you found this video to be beneficial, please follow us on Facebook or subscribe to our YouTube channel. Feel free to share it with others that you feel like may benefit from it. If you need to contact us, please contact us via email at quinn.church@yahoo.com. Also, if you're in the area, we would love for you to come visit with us at one of our assemblies. Have a good day.